Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you to this panel discussion. Again, the title is on Salmon and Tribes, the deterioration of the Salmon River fishery and health of a Northern California tribe in the Klamath River watershed. When I was asked to go ahead and moderate this panel, I thought, what as a Lakota have I? What's the connection? And I did see the video that will be shown later, and the title caught my attention. The title of the video is Salmon on the Backs of the Buffalo. And as a Lakota, I understand what that means because of the buffalo kills. And so there were some points there that resonated with me. So I accepted to be the moderator. And a couple of the things that I would like to say with respect to this issue in terms of how it's prevalent throughout Native country. The buffalo analogy is a good one, at least for a lot of the Native nations in the plains, southern plains, northern plains, Canadian plains. We understand, the plains is like the river for us too. Buffalo would migrate up and down, just like the salmon would migrate out to the sea and then back in millions, in numbers that were too numerous to count. So that's in our oral history. And as I was listening to the video, I could see that as well with the Native nations up in the northern part of California. And the relationship too is very profound. As I heard the Native people talking about the relationship of the salmon, the impact and the loss of that, I also understood that as a Lakota. In terms of Native diet, I understand that without that Native diet, we also have suffered high rates of diabetes. We've also suffered many, many health effects from that. And ceremonially speaking too, there's a lot of ceremonies that went on with our relationship to the buffalo. And from what I understand about the Native nations in Northern California, the loss of the salmon also impacts their ceremonial life. Dams, I mean that in many ways. Dams. We also have those on the Missouri River. And while we don't have salmon runs, they have impacted our life too, because we depend on the Missouri River as Lakota people and other Native peoples along the Missouri River. And I've seen that with the Klamath River, how many Native peoples really been affected by the dams. I think what really also resonated with me was to see those salmon not being able to make the journey that the Creator asked them to do. The salmon understand their responsibilities in that regard. I understand that. And to see those salmon not being able to make it to their homeland or to their place where they're supposed to. I understand that because in the Yellowstone National Park, the last remnant herd of natural buffalo, every time they cross the Yellowstone National Park, they're shot. And so I know about natural buffalo, and I understand what they mean when they say natural salmon versus commercial or domestic. We have those kind of connections as well. And so to understand how this all impacts what they call the fish kills, I understand how it understands the buffalo. So I better get ready here. I want to just quickly introduce the panelists. Peter Moyle, Professor of Fish and Biology in the Department of Wildlife, Fish, and Conservation Biology, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate courses on fish biology, aquatic ecology, and conservation. The second panelist I want to introduce, Ron Reed, is a traditional Karuk dip net fisherman and cultural biologist in the fisheries program of the Karuk Department of Natural Resources. Ron has been an active leader in restoring the Klamath River fishery on the local and regional levels. Third is Khari Norgard, is an environmental sociologist with UC Davis Interdisciplinary Program on biological invasions. She holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Oregon, and her research on the recent health and epidemic of the Karuk people has been featured on National Public Radio. Also, Russ Kantz is a staff environmental scientist in the Division of Water Rights at the State Water Resources Control Board. Russ is senior specialist on a team that prepares water quality certification for hydroelectric facilities, undergoing relicensing with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And Kelly Catlett is a Friends of the Rivers Hydropower Reform Policy Advocate. She participates in the licensing of hydropower projects throughout California, including the Klamath relicensing, and serves on the steering committee of the California Hydropower Reform Coalition. Anyway, these are our panelists here, and what we'll go ahead and do is the first part of this is fishery and impacts on the tribe. And we'll start off with Peter Moyle, who's going to talk about the Klamath River fishery. Second will be Ron Reed on the impacts of the tribe with decline in the fishery. And then we'll have Khari Norgard also talking under that title as well. So I think without any further ado, they're trying to get me off here, so I'll turn it over to the panelists. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to be trying to introduce you to the Klamath River and to its fisheries. There's a lot going on up there, and has been for some time. And recently, though, we've been in a really major crisis up there. And but first off, let me just introduce you to the basic river system, which you can argue is an upside-down river system, in that the upper parts of the river come through a wide valley system up in Oregon and Northern California. And then the geology abruptly changes, and it drops down and becomes a fairly precipitous river. This is sort of the basis of the ecology of the system and the basis for a lot of the problems that we face today, because the upper valley is the home of the Klamath Project, which is a major irrigation project. This project was authorized in 1905, and it was one of the very first projects of the Bureau of Reclamation to bring white settlers into this valley and develop it for agriculture. Probably for today's purpose, the most important thing is the fact that the major reservoir in the Klamath Project is Upper Klamath Lake, a natural lake that was turned into a reservoir. The Klamath Project has had enormous changes to the Upper Klamath Basin. There's a usual sort of thing: you drain all the wetlands, you build canals and dams, and create 200,000 acres or so of farmland. And among that, and you use a lot of water for irrigated agriculture, including flood irrigated pasture. It's worth noting, though, that the Klamath Project is not even the principal user of water in the basin. There's lots of other farms that get water from other sources than the project. Then as you go downstream, you run into a chain of dams, and you'll be hearing more about those later on. The lowest of which is Iron Gate Dam in about the middle reaches of the river. Then this is a hydroelectric dam, as are most of the dams on the system. And Iron Gate Dam, which sort of forms the boundary between the upper and the lower basin now, is shown where that red line is across the river. And the next thing to note here, though, is that there are 4 important tributaries that come into the lower Klamath River. The Shasta River, the Scott River, the Salmon, and the Trinity. I'm not going to say anything about the Trinity River today, because I think we're really going to be focusing pretty much for this entire program on the reach above where the Trinity River comes in. There's been some major ecological triumphs in the Trinity recently. More water is now flowing down the river than before, and that's going to make some difference to the salmon, but we aren't really going to be talking about those. Let me say a couple of things about some of these rivers. First off, the Shasta River used to be one of the most productive salmon rivers on a per mile basis of any river in North America. A phenomenally productive system with these big springs coming out of Mount Shasta, forming a good-sized river of really cold water. And I'll show you later that salmon have just about disappeared from this system. And to my way of thinking, this verges on being criminal, that this once major river system with really cold water in it is allowed to be used to irrigate pasture and alfalfa. I'll skip the Scott River for lack of time next, but they go downstream. A more natural system is the Salmon River, well named, but also a river which is in trouble. It's really warmer than it should be due to a whole bunch of things I'll talk about later. And then the big issues here, though, are on the main stem Klamath. This is the river that supports these big runs of salmon. And in that river, you hear mostly about salmon. In particular, you're hearing mostly about fall-run Chinook salmon. But in fact, there's a whole group of species that can be labeled tribal trust species. These are the anadromous fishes, the sea-run fishes, that the federal government is supposed to be managing in trust for the tribes. In other words, supposed to be managing the river so that fisheries for these species can be maintained. And we're talking about coho salmon, Chinook salmon, 2 different runs of Chinook salmon, steelhead, a couple of runs of steelhead, cutthroat trout, ulakan, which is a smelt, green sturgeon, and Pacific lamprey. These historically were all fishes that were used by the tribes down there. And what's important to note is shown in this graph right here, which all these dark lines show when these species are present in the river at different times of the year. It's months on the bottom with the steelheads going down the side. And what you see, where I had the yellow lines drawn in there, those are when the adult fish are in the river. And if you look at that graph closer, you'll see that virtually every month of the year, there were adult fish migrating from the ocean into the Klamath River. So it's not surprising then that the culture and diets of the tribes were really based a lot on fish. This was a river that was rich in fish, rich not only in salmon, but in a diversity of fish that came up from the ocean. Here are some of the species that we won't say too much about, but are very important. Coastal cutthroat, ulakan, which is virtually gone from the river now. No one says too much about that, but it used to be a very important tribal fishery. Green sturgeon, one of the few species that seems to be sustaining its populations. And then Pacific lamprey, another species which is really declining, and unfortunately. The more important species, the ones that people think the most about when you come to the river, though, are species like the steelhead, which is really sea-run rainbow trout. Again, 2 different runs in the river. They're perhaps more important to anglers than to as tribal fisheries, but in fact they're potentially have been major sources of income for people living along the river, because steelhead fishermen are willing to pay big bucks to come and catch these fish. The big river, the salmon, though, the Chinook salmon are by far and away the most important and abundant of these fishes. They're all river spawners. They're big river fish by and large. They can get up to 100 pounds, which means when you think about it, you can have a run of 100,000 Chinook salmon in this river, which would be worth 2 or 3 or 4 or 500,000 salmon anyplace else, because of the sheer size of these fish. So these are really important runs that bring in not only a lot of fish that can be used as food, but they're bringing in nutrients from the ocean that really power the ecosystems along the river. And there were 2 different runs of fish on the river, the spring run and the fall run. Neither one is really listed, although after the next few years they may be, the way things are going. The spring run should be, but it's genetically regarded not as distinct enough. Well, what you can see has happened to the Chinook salmon. Last year, there were only 89,000 of these fish that came back to the river. Now, that seems like a large number, but it's not compared to what was there historically. The historic numbers were 250 to 400,000 fish per year. Those are rough estimates. In recent years, it's been more along the lines of 150 to 200,000, which is quite remarkable when you consider the state of the river. But this is partly because these runs are subsidized by hatcheries. There are big fish hatcheries at the headwaters of the Trinity River, and also up below Iron Gate Dam on the Klamath River. Say the spring run, as I mentioned, is endangered. It used to be about 100,000 fish a year, and now maybe as few as 150 of those fish are coming up a year. This is really a remarkable run that I hate to see lost. And this gives you some idea of the way the salmon populations have fluctuated in the river. The lower red line shows you what the numbers are last year. comparison to previous years. You can see it's been going up and down for a long time, whereas the upper red line shows you what the numbers were like in 2002 and 2003, roughly. So a lot of variability in the populations, but we've seen this precipitous drop in the last year. I'll try to explain that. Perhaps even more tragic, though, is the situation of the Shasta River. As I mentioned, the Shasta River used to be one of the most productive salmon streams in California, if not in the world. And even in the 1930s, when there was already a dam on the river and a lot was going on and a lot of agriculture was taking place, there were still runs coming back in the 80,000s. It probably supported runs of salmon that were in the excess of 100,000 fish alone at one time. And you can see it's dropped down to a veritable trickle, and now just a few fish come back into the river and have for a long time. Well, the species that's of most concern in the river, that's gotten the most attention in recent years, has been the coho salmon. But this species is the only one of these species that's currently listed as a threatened or endangered species. And it was listed as threatened by the federal government in 1997 and by the state in 2003. This species had a major collapse statewide, not just in the Klamath Basin. This data is very poor, so this is my excuse for drawing a slide like this. But the numbers are very low all throughout the state. And essentially, the coho need cold water. They need tributary streams with cold water and diverse habitat in it. And the main stem is less important, although they do need to migrate through it. But they rear in fresh water for a year, and they need all that habitat. But they're faced with all these problems. Logging on upstream areas. This is showing you of light snow, showing you what happens with clear cuts. Believe me, sediment comes off those steep slopes and affects the rivers. There's agriculture in the basin. This is the Shasta River again. There's also hatcheries. We think of hatcheries as being good, somehow subsidizing the fisheries, but what we've become to realize increasingly that hatcheries may keep a lot of fish in the river, at least temporarily, but it's often at the expense of wild populations. And of course, there's a decline in main stem flows, which you'll be hearing, the change in main stem flows, which you'll be hearing about. Well, the big crisis came in 2000, 2001, when the worst drought on record hit the upper basin. And most of the water for irrigation was stored at Upper Klamath Lake. The Bureau of Reclamation decided they wanted to give it to the farmers, and which they pretty much did. But even though the fisheries agencies argued that water in the lake was needed for endangered suckers and salmon. Again, there's lots of competition for this water in the upper basin, because that's what brings water into the lower river. I notice I have upper basin farmers up there. It's really the upper basin farmers versus all the rest of these interests. Somehow they've managed to dominate the arguments for some time. But the unexpected event was this big fish kill in the Klamath. You probably heard of it in September 2002, when somewhere between 35,000 and 70,000 fish were killed. A major tragedy by anybody's reckoning. And the cause was classic. A bunch of fish came into the river a little bit early, but not exceptionally so. There were high temperatures in the river. It was a warm September. They came in high numbers. And there were low releases from the dam by the Bureau of Reclamation. These things in combination apparently delayed the migration. The fish just hung out in the lower river rather than moving. Under these crowded conditions, it was possible for an epidemic disease to sweep through the population and kill large numbers of fish. Well, there are solutions to these problems. And obviously, you got to manage the flows for the tribal trust species. We need really important to restore the tributaries. That's hard to overemphasize that. There's a need for watershed management. You'll hear talk about removing dams. We need to change the way we operate the hatcheries, and a whole bunch of other things that need to be done as well. So we have some interesting things developing in the system right now. It just popped up in the last few years. Maybe even the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission will be one of the unlikely rescuers of this system, because they could order all these dams torn down or order fish passage over the dams. And because the license to run these dams expires next year. And interestingly enough, there's a recent publication by some biologists from NIMS and other other places demonstrate there were large runs of fish that went up all the way up into the upper Klamath Lake and spawned in the tributaries to the lake. It's sort of interesting that if to say that, you need a peer-reviewed publication. The opposition can say there were no salmon up there, and you never have to document it. Interesting, Pacific Corp, the big power company, is maybe a player in this whole some positive things too. They've been subsidizing under orders the electric rates to the farmers up there, and now they are in the process of appealing and trying to say, hey, the farmers should pay like everybody else does, and the farmers, of course, say if we have to pay those rates, we won't be able to farm. You can decide for yourselves whether that's a tragedy or not. And above all that, there's a realization that what happens in the Klamath River, the effects are not just confined to the Klamath Basin. Right now, the commercial fisheries in the ocean off California are being shut down because when you're fishing in the ocean, you can't tell Klamath Basin fish from Sacramento Basin fish. The Sacramento River fish are doing fine right now, but the fishermen are not being allowed to catch them in order to protect the Klamath Basin salmon, which are projected to come back in record low numbers again this year. So these problems are ongoing, they're widespread, and they have big impacts, even beyond the tribal impacts. Thank you.
My name's Ron Reed, Karuk Tribe. I'm a traditional dip net fisherman, I'm a ceremonial person, and I'm a fishery advocate. And I guess before I can get into this talk, I want to give you a little perspective, and I like to talk with my hands, so I'm going to put this down a little bit. And I would like to just start out by saying the Karuk people have lived in the Klamath River Basin, in ancestral territory, which I'll show a picture in a little bit, since time immemorial. The Karuk Tribe, we believe that we were put here by the Creator, and at that point in time when the Creator put us on earth, the Creator prescribed the conditions that the Karuk people would manage the resources and manage their lives in such a way that would benefit all living things and that would live in harmony with one another. And it's something that the Karuk Tribe is willing to find that solution today, and I think we're very close to do that, to doing that. And I would just like to say also that management is culture, harvesting of the resources is culture, and the Karuk Tribe practices culture by way of ceremony. I mean that the white deerskin dance is part of the world renewal ceremony. In Karuk language, that's Pikiawish. Pikiawish means world renewal. Ancestral territory is in the red. And it was the way I understand it is that back in the day, the Klamath tribes up in the upper basin would come down, and they would migrate down during the ceremonial season. They would travel down to Enam, which is approximately right down here somewhere. So all the tribes would come down the basin and come down to Enam. All the tribes down the lower basin would come all the way down to about right here at Orleans. And then the ceremony would climax at Kudimeen, the center of the world. And at that point, it became a big social event, a big gathering event. People would be getting married, people would trade, people would gamble, it was a big festival at the end of these events. But before that, during the climax of that ceremony, the medicine man goes up on the sacred mountain and he kicks off a burning log to initiate the burning season. And that is what the principle of Karuk Karuk management was fire. And that's what we're doing today. We're trying to go back and try to look at the forest and be able to, again, make prescriptions so we're able to reintroduce fire into the system, which would alleviate some of the pressure on the river by allowing water to flow from upslope down into the system like it did pre-contact. And by the way, I point at that as the only proven system, the only proven process in the system, because at that point is when we had the magnificent fishery that Dr. Moyle referred to earlier. I'll get it. This is a trigger net fishery, and part of that world renewal process is kicked off in the spring. It's inaugurated in the spring, and this is how we fish for the spring salmon right here. The first salmon ceremony is a ceremony that we do not have today, primarily due to the lack of spring salmon that flows up past this spot on the river. And basically what happens with that spring salmon ceremony, when the medicine man first catches the fish, he catches that fish approximately 70 miles from the ocean. When he catches that first fish, then it becomes, the fishery is allowable to all the tribes down below that point. So in other words, we're allowing for escapement. From that point above, none of the tribes above that point can fish for the spring salmon until the next ceremony. There we go again. And this is the spring salmon, and this is their primary, this is what we use for subsistence purposes and obviously for ceremonial purposes. We used to use this fish primarily for the fresh meat and after a long season. But before this ceremony happened, there's another species that Dr. Moyle mentioned was the lamprey. And that is a particularly important species because none of the tribes in the basin are allowed to catch salmon until this first salmon ceremony is made. And so the lamprey, which is the biggest biological mass in the river at one point, I believe it still is today, that would alleviate the issues of food until we're able to fish for the salmon. So it's a very important species that is not available to the tribes today because of lack of numbers. Back to management. Okay, the first process was the first salmon ceremony for the spring salmon. This is the second ceremony in the world renewal process. And this is basically the fall salmon ceremony. And I talked about earlier, we was unable to fish for salmon above that point of the first salmon ceremony. And then up the river, another 40 or 50 miles, we have this fall salmon ceremony, which is not called that, but for this purpose, I'll call it the first salmon ceremony. And basically, at this point, people can fish all the way up to this point, and nobody can fish above. And then the next ceremony will be up to the Shasta tribes, and they have a first salmon ceremony, and it goes so on and so forth on up the river. And so that's how the tribes manage the resources in such a way by ceremonies. And right here is a dip net fishery, and that's from a long time ago. But as you notice, this has to be after the first salmon ceremony, and look how much water is in the system. This is at Ike's Falls, which is we still utilize as a fishery today, and needless to say, we don't have that type of water in the system today. And this is yours truly, and this is a picture that I guess represents the only fishery in over 70 miles of river that the Karuk Tribe is allowed to fish at. And 2002, we caught, during the fish kill, we caught around 15,000 or 1,500 fish. 2003, we caught around 1,000. Last year, we caught less than 100 fish at this fishery. The Karuk Tribe is the second largest tribe in California with over 3,000 tribal members. So you don't have to be a mathematician at UC Davis to figure out that isn't not enough to go around. And I guess the results are the Ultra Diet report that Dr. Khari Norgard is going to get into a little bit later. But I think those are the issues of concern right here, and it's a big concern. Along with that fishery, It's part of the culture that's involved with not only the nutrient values that goes into effect, but it's the cultural values that are carried on here. That's me, my son up at the top, my son right there packing some fish, and my other son, my nephew, and my other son. And this is part of the culture, this is part of the tradition, is that you go down at this fellow's age right here, and you walk around in the rocks, big rocks, hard to get down there, hard to get around. And this is part of the process that one day, if we have the resources available, he will be doing the same thing I do, is not only fishing, not only taking his children, his nephews and things down, but also, I imagine he's going to be right here, what I'm doing today. I hope. And so this is what it's all about. I mean, this is what it's all about right here. Is that's what we do, the things we do. And I think Edward said it very well. This is our culture. This is our religion. And all the things that happen while we're doing these things is that process of culture. And I can't overemphasize that enough. And again, a part of this thing again, this is my older brother. And this is the interaction that needs to happen. We need the elders to talk to the children to pass on the wisdom, to pass on the culture, to pass on the things that are very important that was passed down to us. Pretty popular pictures here. I imagine you're going to probably see a lot of them. You probably see a lot of them, continue to see a lot of these pictures. But obviously, Iron Gate Dam, no fish passage. Is it a restoration opportunity? And of course, I believe so. And I'll tell you why. Iron Gate Dam was put in the early 60s. I was the same age as my sons, my older sons there, when I was down there packing fish out for my elders, for the people up on top of the hill. The difference between then and now is that when I was a child, we started fishing in late July, early August. We'd be done fishing by school time, by Labor Day weekend, we'd be done fishing. All the people that I was associated with would have spring salmon. They would have spring salmon in storage. When this dam came up, it cut off 8 miles of pristine spring Chinook habitat. That's the fishery that is unavailable to the Karuk Tribe today at Ishipishi Falls, because we just have a small remnant population. We'll catch 1, 2, 3 fish during that particular time, rather than 600, 700, 800 fish in that month, in that period of time. So there's a big difference, and again, I can't overemphasize that. And it's basically, those are the fish that we do not have available to us today, and therefore a lot of the culture is lost in that process. And it goes right back to what do we do today? What's the difference between today and yesterday? And this is it. Instead of being home, fishing for the spring salmon, last year, the 4 tribes in the basin, the Hupa, the Yurok, the Karuk, and the Klamath tribes went to Scotland. Instead of fishing for spring salmon, we was over there asking Scottish Power, do they realize what the impacts they're doing to not only the river, but to the 4 sovereign nations that rely on these resources for their way of life, for their integrity, for their lifestyle. The same things that you hear over and over in this basin. And in my opinion, like history tells us so well, our perspective is not being honored. the promises are not being honored. And that's all we're asking for now. We're not asking for to ask farming to not exist. We're not asking that. We're asking them for sustainability. We're talking about back to what we believe in is harmony. Everybody working together and being able to do the best thing for the resource and everybody involved, rather than specific special interest groups. This year, instead of down fishing for lamprey down at Ishipishi Falls, we're at the state capitol. Again, my sons. Salmon is our culture. Salmon is who we are. And therefore, we will walk to the ends of the earth for this species. We will do what we have to do to make sure that my children have the same opportunity that I was presented when I was a child. And with that, I leave you with the pristine picture of the Salmon River. Dr. Moyle mentioned that the spring Chinook is in great danger, and this is the largest wild stock above the Trinity River confluence in the basin. That's what's left of the spring Chinook. And there's a remnant population left. And with this shot, with this picture right here, I want to let you know that the tribe has hope, that we will continue to work in these forums that we work in to develop a harmony, a sustainability, that all people in the basin can benefit from this river the way the Creator made it. With that, thank you very much.
My name's Khari Norgard, and I'm a sociologist here in the IGRT program on biological invasions at UC Davis. And last summer, Ron and some other folks in the tribe approached me and asked if I would help document some of the issues they were facing. So the research I'll describe is work that was done under contract for the tribe. Let's see, I gotta get this thing. So the context for this project, essentially, you'll hear more about the overall process from some of the other panelists, but essentially the dams on the Klamath River are up for relicensing under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And so one of the things that means is there's a lot of studies about what are the kinds of impacts of those dams. And Ron and others had been going to meetings and trying to articulate the kinds of issues that he spoke to you about, the importance to the culture, and not feeling as well heard as they'd like to be. And so that's where they asked if I could help document some of the kinds of health impacts that were connected. One of the things I just want to mention is that through both federal and state policy, there are environmental justice laws which say that the impacts from federal and state projects should be evaluated for the potential disproportionate impacts on racial minorities and low-income populations. And so that's part of the context that should be considered in the FERC relicensing. The Karuk Tribe asked for PacifiCorp to put that in, and they said that they didn't need to. Nonetheless, the kind of research that I did falls in that category. So what I went about doing essentially went through a bunch of the tribal medical records and started pulling out what are the rates of the so-called diet-related diseases, and I'll talk more about this. And I began looking at the kinds of archival data that was available, what was known about historic fish consumption levels and what had been recorded. And furthermore, I spent some time listening to tribal members and interviewing people, and well, how much did you eat 30 years ago? How much did you eat 15 years ago? And so on and so forth. One of the things that's become very clear as I've learned more about this area is that the Karuk people have one of the most recent and dramatic shifts in their diet of Indian people in the United States. It's and I'll talk more about that. Part of this is probably because of the very remote area that they are living. Although there was a lot of impacts from when miners came, the gold rush in around the 1850s, it's relatively late compared to Indian people who were affected by the mission system and had a lot of diet change at that time. And then after the miners were in the area, they left. And so there was some chance for people to remain some cultural integrity. So as a result, there have a fairly unique situation of actually having a fair amount of culture and resources intact until recently. So prior to European contact, it's estimated that Karuk people were eating about a little over a pound of salmon per person per day, or about 450 pounds in a year. There were at least 8 runs of salmon that people were catching, and food was eaten fresh and dried and so forth. People that you talk to now who are younger than myself, who are in their early 30s, were eating salmon 3 times a day if they were from traditional families that were still living in the river area. So it's very recent, the amount of salmon that's changed. And for example, Ron talking about when he was young, catching those spring salmon that were going up above where Eingate Dam is now. In contrast, in 2003, it was less than 5 pounds per person per year. And then if you look at 2004, where there were less than 100 fish caught, less than for 3,000 tribal members, is very dramatic. There are other traditional foods that are also impacted. There are at least 25 foods that people are no longer able to get because they have been unable to manage for them, or because the food resource has been decimated by other groups. The traditional diet, of course, would have been what we now, there's a lot of interest in diet these days, very healthy, low in saturated fats, good complex carbohydrates, high protein. There's a lot of attention to the value of omega-3, and there would have been a natural source of vitamins and minerals, in contrast to the kind of so-called Western diet that we now recognize isn't good for any of us, which is, high in saturated fats and refined sugars, and we fortify our vitamins and minerals. In addition, because this is a subsistence fishery, it's an area that's very poor, there's high unemployment. When you take away that food source, there's also food insecurity issues. So additionally, another health benefit of the kind of food that people were eating until quite recently is that they would get exercise as they're going out and gathering it. So, why is it that the diet has altered? It's important to recognize that the diets of all peoples are changing over time. And so it's not just that, things should stay exactly the same way and that's how they were. But at the same time, it's important to think that actually it's been a very unnatural process that Karuk people have changed. It's not been voluntary at all. Historically, of course, like through the miners coming in, many people were killed. This disrupted their ability to gather food, and a lot of knowledge was probably lost at that time. And then you have the whole process of forced assimilation, where people through boarding school experiences and so forth are supposed to become white and give up all these ways. And so there's a lot of literal and also sort of pressures, part of this process of assimilation. But when you think about why is it that diets are altered now, today, the most important ongoing process is that they are denied access to their foods. The resources are not there. They've been destroyed by outside agencies making decisions over management or the destruction by other groups. So the consequences of these, Ron spoke about the cultural and religious consequences. In the report, I also described somewhat the kinds of social consequences of interactions of different people. But the thing that's been the focus of my work has been just describing the epidemic rise in what are called the diet-related diseases. Furthermore, there's also, because not only was salmon good food, it was also food, and so there's issues of food security. Again, as Ron mentioned, there's the general cultural and spiritual type of impacts. This sense then of when people are going out in the world together and collecting things and gathering, that there's a chance for information is being passed on, there's socialization that's happening and so forth. And in terms of diseases, diabetes is clearly one that gets a great deal of attention and is extremely important, and the rates of diabetes in the tribe are very high. Also, there's things like high blood pressure, heart disease, kidney troubles, again, are connected to diabetes, strokes, rates of certain cancers, obesity, loss of vision, again, also connected to diabetes, and dental type of issues as well. All of this accumulating in people dying, elders dying younger, and having a not very good quality of life towards the last part of their time. So the rates of diabetes for the Karuk tribe, it's some of the first numbers I were looking at, it looked like it was about 12%. Actually, it's probably more around closer to 20% compared with the U.S. average as a whole, which is increasing for all of us, is around 6%. Similarly, heart disease is about 3 times what it is in the U.S. population as a whole. Obesity in the tribe is much higher, and especially obesity for young people, for people who are under 20, which of course puts them at much greater risk for developing these kinds of diet-related diseases. In addition, it's not just a matter of physical health. For people to be able to go out and to go fish, one of the things that Ron's role in the tribe is he's supposed to be providing fish for the people, for the elders. And so to be able to do that is a source of identity and pride, and to not be able to do that is very painful. And to be able to go out and have your fishery be healthy and to perform all these activities connects people with the land where they live and gives a sense of belonging and well-being. And again, mentioned that sense of the community, the sense of community that comes through that process. So one of the things you could say, well, you know, how do you prove that the high rates of diabetes come from the shift in diet? Well, unless you'd want to do an experiment with all tribal members, which would be pretty expensive, you can't necessarily know beyond a shadow of doubt that that's what's going on. But it's quite compelling to realize that during the same time period that the fish runs have plummeted and that the diet has shifted very dramatically, has been the surge in the epidemic of these kinds of diet-related diseases. And it's also sort of suspicious that if you have diabetes and you go to your doctor, that they would tell you to eat the exact kind of food that Karuk people were eating as a preventative and cure for the conditions that they're now facing. The situation that the Karuk people face, thirdly, is seen worldwide. Worldwide, when Indigenous people go through a rapid shift in their diet from a traditional to Western diet, we see this rise in diabetes and these kinds of diet-related diseases. So while you can't prove it, it's compelling to consider the whole story. Again, just mentioning that it is an issue of not only healthy food. We recognize that salmon, with its omega-3s and all these good qualities of protein, is very healthy food, but it is actually just food on its own. So in the absence of that thriving fishery, we have the loss of a subsistence economy, the income that comes from other people coming in for steelhead fishing and for all kinds of things. Poverty and hunger rates in the tribe are amongst the highest in both California and nationwide. And the poverty rate for the tribe is around 90%. Unemployment is, astronomical. And as a result, what has replaced those healthy foods is commodity goods. So just in closing, I want to thank the IGERT program on biological invasions, where I'm connected here, which has generously allowed me to be up in that part of the world so that I got to spend some time and get to know Ron, and also the other funding sources, including the EPA and the Hydropower Reform Coalition. And I want to thank all those that shared their stories with me in interviews. Thanks.
We're going to open the floor for some discussions. We have about 15 minutes for a Q&A. And if you have any questions, we're being recorded, so make sure you speak loud. and clear and direct your questions to the panelists. So if you want, I'll try to moderate that too. If you have a hand up, I'll try to recognize you. Okay, go ahead and make sure you direct it to you.
Ron, my question is to you. Has anybody looked at how Indigenous burning along the upper reaches of the Klamath may have affected the snowmelt, which in turn would, well, the snowpack actually, how snow would pack such that the snow then would melt at a different rate because you don't have as many air pockets. And then that would affect the flooding regimes, and consequently that would affect flooding longer into the spring and summer season, and that would affect the migration runs of the salmon, and it would affect temperature. And I was just wondering if anyone has done any studies to look at reconstructing Indigenous burning regimes for your tribe and for other tribes along the Klamath.
I would say that I'm glad you brought that up. I guess the question is, has there been any studies involving forest management with the use of fire? And I would say that the tribe is on that path right now currently, and that I know that there's other interests in the basin. And I think, I guess from my perspective is that is the only proven process that we have to get back to the amount of fish that were in the basins pre-contact. In other words, that sure, holistic management, forest management with the use of fire is going to alleviate a lot of the pressures on the fish, because what that means is that there's going to be more water, more cold, pristine water in the cold water refugias, key components to the survival of the species. And I would also offer to say that yes, that is very much the perspective of the Karuk Tribe. That if you go out and take care of the forest, the wetlands is going to release water at the time that is needed, rather than having the water wash out off of the forest floor by way of clear cuts, by way of wildland catastrophic fires and things like that put the species at great risk. And so I would say that yes, the Karuk Tribe is working currently on that with a whole host of other folks pitching in, trying to get to a solution so we can find some resolve in this issue.
If I could add something there. The National Research Council team that I was part of concluded that maintaining cold water in the tributaries to the Klamath was really essential for recovering the fish populations. And that, of course, is tied then to forest management and other kinds of things. So clearly the tribes are on the right path to be restoring some of the natural fire regimes as part of the whole process.
Any other questions, please? Yes.
Yes, well, to what extent has tributary habitat or heterogeneity been reduced for the coho salmon?
The question was, how much has the habitat for coho salmon been reduced in the tributaries? A lot. There's very little habitat left for coho salmon in the Klamath Basin. The entire Shasta River, for example, at one time was prime coho habitat, and there's just tiny numbers of coho that go up there now. You go up into the Scott Valley, where there are just a few tributaries that are still supporting coho, and that's a valley that used to be filled with beaver dams. And behind those beaver dams were large ponds that were just apparently filled with juvenile coho salmon. So indeed, the coho is just barely hanging on in that basin at all because of the severe damage to its habitats in the tributaries.
In the back.
Dr. Norgard, I'm just wondering if your results were published.
So the question was whether my results have been published. Yeah, they have been posted on the FERC, to the FERC process, and are available, I think, through the docket of the FERC website. And I also, if anyone, I can send you great. There's a copy of it here, I guess, that Kat has kindly that we can provided that we can that is available here. And yeah.
Gentleman against the wall.
A lot of the water, I guess, that's diverted from the Klamath River is going to the Klamath Basin, the desert. for these farms like the Tule Lake potato plantation or the alfalfa that's grown there, what are some options for the people that are most vocal about keeping the dams, are farmers or agribusiness? What are some options for growing something that's drought tolerant that doesn't require as much water? And also restoration of places like Tule Lake for like the Woka Silly, which is also a wild edible that is habitat to the region, and also restoring further migratory waterfowl, so that it's the potential of changing it from something that's taking a lot of water for agriculture and making it into something that is already naturally producing plants and animals that are edible also, but maybe it just doesn't require as much subsidies.
Yeah, I can give a shout at that if somebody will help me out. The basic question was, what are some of the alternatives to the present-day agriculture in the Upper Basin? That's a short version of a long question. It had some very good thoughts to it. I think one of the things that you have to consider is really relates to what Khari said, which was that people's way of doing things change naturally anyway. We sort of expect the tribes to be able to change their way of doing things through time. Somehow the farmers in the Upper Basin have gotten the idea that they can do exactly what they're doing today forever and ever, even though they've been changing due to market forces what crops they raise. So it seems to me the real alternatives up there may not necessarily be different kinds of agriculture, but going back to the high-value natural systems up there. After all, the Upper Klamath Basin was once called the Everglades of the West. It still supports amazingly large populations of waterfowl. Those birds are harvested by hunters. There's a lot of bird watchers and other groups, ecotourism that goes up there. So the land up there has a high value beyond agriculture. Plus, obviously, a lot of it could be returned to some of for uses by the tribes, the Klamath tribes in that area as well, who've also been deprived of their livelihoods because of the way that basin is managed. So I think there are lots of alternatives. We have to think long and hard about which ones to consider.
I would like to add that, during all these processes that are happening within the Klamath River water crisis and things like that, we've developed forums, and what Khari's report has enabled me to do is be able to speak and give the Karuk perspective in the forums like this. And in some of those forums, Upper Basin water users are in them forums, and so what has happened is that we've broken down the traditional opposition and actually kind of started saying, hey, this is what salmon means to the tribes, and we've spent sessions, days, and trying to articulate what those issues are. And so in those processes, the water users are saying, hey, those are similar to us. It's tradition, it's integrity, it's family, it's diet, it's all those good things that touch the human heart. And so what has happened now is that there's a new age of management, if you will, is that they're able to kind of we're able to come out of our boxes and be able to say, these are the issues, can you support them? And now that we've come out of our boxes, they're able to support our traditional management processes that we feel can get the basin back into a situation where, people are working in harmony again. So I think that it's an ongoing effort, but it's a positive effort and it's a sincere effort. So I believe in the near future you're going to be hearing more of these warm and fuzzy meetings that are going to ultimately go to the solutions that we need at the top of the pyramid to be able to get to where we need to be.
If you have more questions, we can pick this up at a second Q&A we're going to have, but we need to go ahead and move on with the other panelists. The second part is on agency and legal issues, governmental and legal actions, and it's Russ Kant and Kelly Catlett. So we'll start with Russ.
Good afternoon. Now I get to put you all to sleep. My role at the Water Board is I'm the manager of the relicensing for the Klamath Hydro project at the board. And I need to talk about our regulatory authority, and this is a little dry, but I have to do it. The State Water Board has different authorities. In the case of the Klamath Hydro project, we have authority under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, which I'll get into. The Water Board also ensures compliance with state laws for water quality and water rights. Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, it's a very, very important law, and it's a very powerful law, and it's what I do every day. And what it says is if someone's applying for a federal license or permit, in the case of the Klamath Hydro Project, it's a license from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to relicense the project. If they have a discharge, they need to comply with the Clean Water Act, and we have the authority to enforce that. It's a delegated authority of the states. One of the things that's very powerful about 401 is that the conditions are mandatory at FERC. Whatever conditions we put in a 401 have to be put into the FERC license. FERC hates us. The other thing, there are some other mandatory conditioning authorities, Section 18 with NOAA Fisheries, and also some of the land management agencies have what they call 4E authority. Those cannot be denied. The Water Board can deny issuance of a 401 certification if it determines that a project can't comply with the Act. They do not have to issue a cert. The other thing is the Water Board is required to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act before we issue a 401 cert. So let me talk about the Clean Water Act, because that's really the basis of this. The Clean Water Act is based on protecting the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of nation's waters. What we've done is, under the Clean Water Act, each of the regional boards, there's 9 regional boards in California, they've developed what they call basin plans or water quality control plans. These contain the water quality standards, which are made up of beneficial uses of water that should be protected and water quality objectives. In the case of the Klamath Project, it's the North Coast Regional Board. That's the website. They have their basin plans on the website. So, beneficial uses. There's a long list of beneficial uses, and I just listed a few here because we're talking about salmonids. One of those is cold freshwater habitat. Another one is rare, threatened, or endangered species. In this case, because of the coho, that would be applicable. And then spawning, reproduction, and or early development. There's a new beneficial use that has just been approved and added to the basin plan. This is a really interesting thing. It's never been dealt with before. I'm probably going to be the first one that really has to apply this. And I'm going to need a lot of help from the tribes to deal with this, but it's the Native American cultural beneficial use, and it's uses of water that support the culture and or traditional rights of indigenous people, such as subsistence fishing and shellfish gathering, basket weaving and jewelry, material collection, navigation to traditional ceremonial locations, and ceremonial uses. And what's going to be interesting is to figure out what water quality is really required to support those beneficial uses. And obviously, navigation is going to be a water quantity issue. Help, Ron. So here's some of the water quality objectives. So once you look at your beneficial uses, the water quality objectives are really a way to say, if you meet these, you should be able to protect your beneficial uses. They don't always apply. Sometimes you need to go beyond these, but these are really the main ones that we'll be looking at. One of them is temperature, water temperature, and basin plan really limits the amount that water temperature can be altered. There's dissolved oxygen standards. Another one called biostimulatory substances, which is really nutrients and algae in the river. pH, turbidity, toxicity, pesticides. There's a much longer list. Most of them, in this case, probably aren't going to apply. So let me talk a little bit about the impacts of the Klamath Hydro Project. And we're in the phase now with the project, and I think Kelly's going to talk a little bit more about the process itself, where we're starting to go into an environmental review phase. One of the things that we know is that the project does alter water temperature. And Mike Diaz was here, and Mike's been doing a lot of work on that. In a very simple sense, what happens is the Klamath River is very warm, probably always has been pretty warm. The peak temperature is right about September 1st every year. And what happens in this project is that there's a thermal lag, and that the existence of the reservoirs causes an increase in temperature into the fall period right when the fish are returning to the river, the fish that come back now, the fall run, and also when they're starting to lay eggs. So it's something we're going to look really hard at. Water quality, the dissolved oxygen, there's some significant dissolved oxygen problems. Nutrients, the Klamath River is a very nutrient-rich system. There was a study done on Upper Klamath Lake where they took sediment cores of Upper Klamath Lake and they looked at how the limnology of the lake changed over time. And it really shows that right about 1850 with European settlement, the whole ecology of that lake changed. And it was always very rich and eutrophic. It became hyper-eutrophic and it changed. The diatoms changed, the algae changed, everything about Klamath Lake changed. These reservoirs, the reservoirs that are in the project have very large algae blooms. Last year there was a bloom on Kopko. I made an aerial video. We flew a airplane over the project. Fish and Game lent me an airplane and a pilot too, which was good. But we started Upper Klamath Lake and we flew all the way down the river and hung a camcorder in the bottom of the airplane. And when we hit Kopko Reservoir, up at the upper end, it turned from what appeared to be a normal Klamath kind of water quality. It turned green, very green. All of Kopko Reservoir was green. So I talked about this and some people took a sample, and unfortunately it was only one sample, it was all they could afford. And it turns out that there was a very large bloom of an algae called Microcystis aeruginosa. It produces a toxin called microcystin, which affects kidney, livers, causes tumors to grow faster. But it was found at a level that was 482 times higher than the World Health Organization approved level for drinking water. So the blooms are very bad in the reservoirs, and we need to do some more work on that. Well, the other thing that the reservoirs do is they have an effect on the assimilative capacity of the river. The natural river processes where they clean themselves up and absorb nutrients are really affected. The other thing that this project does is it affects directly the beneficial use in that it blocks access to the historic habitat of the fish. There's between, and the New Fisheries magazine talks about this, there's between 300 and 700 miles of habitat upstream of Iron Gate Dam. And some of that's really good habitat, and there's a lot of really good tributary habitat. And there's also, interestingly enough, some of the work that was done shows there's really good habitat underneath the reservoirs. Anecdotal information about cold springs and other things. So let me talk about CEQA and decommissioning. The California Environmental Quality Act, and so does our 401 analysis, really requires the development of methods to avoid or reduce impacts. The impacts of the project are significant. I don't think anyone can deny that. They may be very difficult to mitigate. I don't know if unmitigable is a real word, but I made it up. We really have to look at a full range of alternatives, including volitional passage, meaning a fish swimming upstream by itself, and decommissioning, or more really specifically is dam removal. One of the things that we are going to have to do is get some information on the impacts of actually removing the dams, looking at the sediments, are there toxic materials in the sediments, the volume of sediments. Some initial work has been done on that that's pretty promising. We'll see where it goes. And really quickly, I'll talk about environmental justice. This is something new and we're still trying to figure it out. The California Environmental Protection Agency has been working with the boards, departments, offices to develop a policy and program for environmental justice. In 2004, an EJ action plan was prepared, developed guidance. It provided guidance on precautionary approaches, guidance on cumulative impacts analysis, directed improved tools for public participation, community capacity building, and ensure consideration within the governor's environmental action plan. So a big part of the EJ program is the development of pilot projects, and these pilot projects are supposed to incorporate the themes in the governor's environmental action plan and focus on environmental risk factors that impact children's health. So the State Water Board was developed 2 pilot programs. Interestingly enough, one's on the Mexican border and one's on the Oregon border. On the Mexican border, it's the New River, and on the northern end, it's the Klamath River. And interestingly enough, the issues are completely different. The New River is just basically a toxic soup that comes in from Mexico, and if you jump in it, you turn purple and die or something. But we also, they chose the Klamath River, and the Klamath River is a much different issue, and I think it's a really different EJ issue in the fact that it's all about salmon. And it's not about pesticides, it's not about a toxic material, it's really about fish, equal distribution of resources, which is an issue for EJ. One of the things this EJ pilot program does is it's going to require the establishment of a stakeholder advisory group to develop information on tribal health statistics, measurable indicators, and a lot of this is a result of Khari's work too. That her report really helped us and helped, I think, spur this forward within the board when that report came out. So, and we're now to the point where we're trying to put a group together of members from all the tribes and move forward with this. And Ron's been pushing this thing all along pretty hard. So that is all I have.
Hello, I am Kelly Catlett. Just thought I'd remind you, since it's been a while since I was first introduced. We've heard a lot about the problem on the Klamath today. You heard Dr. Moyle discuss the state of the fisheries. Ron discussed the state of the tribe and their spirituality. Dr. Norgard discussed the impacts to tribal health. And you heard Russ talk a little bit about water quality and the interplay of the project and its impacts there. So what I'm hoping I'm going to be able to do for you all is provide a little bit of context to that and discuss some of the avenues that we are working on to change all that and make it better. So there are 3 basic venues that Friends of the River and the tribes and the water board work in to try and change this. The first one is the FERC relicensing. The second one is the settlement negotiation. And the third is the Bring the Salmon Home campaign, which I'll explain what that is a little bit later on. FERC relicensing, there it is. It's all clear, right? This is a not so helpful schematic, which I will endeavor to translate for you. Relicensing, here we're going to go through a crash course, is basically a 5-year process. It requires consultation with tribes, agencies, and the public. And you can basically break relicensings down into 3 stages. The first being the scoping of issues. The second being the study phase, where we undertake studies to find out exactly what's going on and what can be done to change that. And we use those later on in the third phase, which is environmental review, to inform decision making on how to manage these projects. On the Klamath in particular, there's a big elephant in the room. And I'm just going to acknowledge it right here, and that's the issue of dam removal. And is that, or should that be, something that we look at as an option on this project for a variety of reasons? And there are several constituencies, among them certain agencies, the tribes, commercial fishermen, and conservation groups who feel pretty strongly that we have resource objectives that can only be achieved through removal. So as I go through the rest of this, you can kind of take that as informing what our ultimate goal is here and why we've chosen to pursue some of the strategies that we have pursued. So where is the Klamath? This project is in the environmental review phase. We have seen license applications. FERC has scoped out its environmental issues twice, I might add. And the next steps are going to be to see a draft and a final EIS. And then it's sort of in FERC's hands to make a licensing decision. What stakeholders are doing at this point is continuing to build the record to flesh out areas where we don't feel there's adequate information to make a decision on how to manage this project. And after that, it's sort of up to FERC. We expect this process to conclude in late 2006, but FERC is a little flexible with its deadlines. They say they're not, but frequently issuance of certain milestones like the EIS has been pushed back. And, I don't know, the latest estimates are late 2006. Interestingly enough, the current license for this project will expire in March of 2006. So we may or may not see an annual license on this project. The second venue is settlement. And basically, settlement in general is an agreement between stakeholders on the parameters and terms of a new license. These are some very happy people from PG&E because they have just concluded a settlement on one of their projects. Settlement is kind of a fast and loose process. There is no formal FERC policy or guidelines. It's typically initiated by the licensee, but sometimes is initiated by really motivated stakeholders. It can occur at any time during the relicensing process and can either be in lieu of a relicensing or parallel to. A lot of times, companies will decide that their efforts are best put into settlement, and so they'll stop the relicensing effort and put all their efforts into settlement. Klamath did not go that route, so we have an ongoing relicensing where everyone's doing that, and an ongoing settlement. So double the work, double the fun. The take-home message I would like to leave you with in settlement is that the most innovative licensing solutions, including dam removals, have all come from settlements. In fact, FERC has never, in its history, ordered the removal of a dam. Little caveat there. Technically, they did order it one time. It was promptly mired in litigation, and then it settled out. So it's a wholly and completely untested area of the law as to whether or not their authority to remove a project would be upheld. So for now, the trend is if you're going to do it, it's going to come through settlement. So the Klamath settlement process, it's important for me to say at the outset that these are confidential proceedings by agreement of all the participants. So that limits severely what I can say. But I can tell you that it has been ongoing since November of 2004. And the parties include the 4 tribes, federal agencies, California and Oregon agencies, commercial fishermen, counties, conservation groups, ranchers, irrigators, and the company, Pacificor. And the basic goal that we're trying to achieve is a comprehensive agreement on how to manage the project. Which brings us to the Bring the Salmon Home campaign. About a year and a half ago, 2 years, something like that, we sort of reached ahead in the relicensing process where things were bogged down. And several constituents were extremely frustrated at the stalemate in the process. And so we began to look at other venues where we could get our needs met and achieve some of our goals. That led to the creation of the Bring the Salmon Home campaign. It is a collaborative effort between the 4 tribes along the Klamath River, PCFFA, which is the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, which is an association of commercial fishing organizations, and Friends of the River. We use media, lobbying, and corporate campaign strategies in the hopes of convincing the company, certain agencies, and elected officials that there's a real need to bring the salmon home on the Klamath River, not just for the overall good of the species or the health of the river, but for the tribes and for their continued spirituality, for their continued ability to feed themselves and teach their children the way of being. So one of the more interesting things that we have done through this campaign work is we went to Scotland last year because we weren't getting anywhere with Pacificor, the company. So we went to their parent company, Scottish Power, to talk to them. And we went during their annual shareholders meeting, and there's a picture of several of the tribal members. They were instant media darlings. Every media outlet in Scotland was eager to hear their story and print their story and followed many of the tribal members around as though they were rock stars. So the Scottish people really seem to identify with the tribes because they too have a cultural identity which is centered around their salmon. And they've really shared that and indeed cheered the tribes on in their quest to get an audience with leadership at Scottish Power. So the trip to Scotland generated press in more than 120 outlets throughout the world, including the London Guardian, the New York Times, Taipei Times, the Hindu, and BBC World. And then there's a couple of the press clippings. The result is that tribal issues dominated Scottish Power's annual shareholder meeting, which thus forced the company to acknowledge tribal concerns. This is pretty miraculous, given that this project comprises a grand total of approximately 151 megawatts. It's less than 1% of Pacificor's total portfolio. It doesn't even register in terms of Scottish Power's. And so issues there dominated this shareholder meeting. Another good result was that it forced Scottish Power to state very publicly on Scottish national television that they're committed to working with the tribes to address their concerns. And shortly thereafter, Pacificor initiated settlement discussions. So in conclusion, there are many avenues and opportunities that exist to address tribal concerns. And tribes, fishermen, and conservation groups are taking advantage of all of the promising avenues and even employing some outside-the-box strategies. And I guess to end on an uplifting note, we remain cautiously optimistic that we will find a way to bring the salmon home.
Thank you. And I think we'll go ahead and open up the floor again for a Q&A. Make sure your questions are real short and direct, and we appreciate the panelists when they repeat the question. Helps clear things. So if there's any questions from the floor, this gentleman.
Either for Ron or for Kelly, what's the speculation as to how the transfer of those dams from Scottish Power to the new company, Warren Buffett's company? Do you guys have any idea how that's going to go about with removing the dam?
Well, I think we're still trying to assess that restate the question. Is there any idea as to how transfer of the company, recently Pacificor was bought out by Mid-American. So is there any idea as to how that sale from Scottish Power to Mid-American, which is a Warren Buffett company, how will that affect the ongoing relicensing in these efforts? And the answer is, largely, I think we're still trying to assess that. I don't think we have a real good handle yet as to what to expect from Mid-American. It is important to note that the sale of this company needs to go through regulatory approval of 6 PUCs, the Securities and Exchange Commission, FERC, and approval by the shareholders of Scottish Power. That process to receive all of those approvals is expected to take a minimum of 1 year and more like a year and a half. So there's a good chance that this whole thing may be wrapped up while this is still under Scottish Power's control. So, you know, I guess the short answer is we're still trying to evaluate, but right now I don't anticipate that it will affect much of anything. And indeed, that's the tack that Pacificor has taken, and they have said that this doesn't change their priorities, this doesn't change their commitment to the process and to moving forward.
Yes.
And I apologize if this has been addressed already, but I have a question for Ron. Ron, how have you seen your tribe and perhaps the associated tribes change in response to working on this issue?
The question is how are the tribes? How have we changed in response to working on these issues? I think that first and foremost, the 4 tribes have gathered to unite to form a common voice, and I think that is something that turns the pages of history back before contact, when we worked on the river system as one, and now we throughout that time since contact, it's evolved back to that particular point in time, is where now we're in collaboration with one another, and we realize that one voice will get us to where we need to be, and apart we're not going to be, we won't have that voice. Also, I think that the tribes have altered their traditions and altered their ways of life to accommodate the limited amount of resources that we utilize to for our culture, you know, for our ceremonies and things like that. But again, through perseverance, through hope, we continue to pray. We continue to do the right things. We continue to go to the meetings. We continue to negotiate in good faith, and I believe all the tribes are on board with that. And together, we have a profound effect on the management process. As if we were just single-handedly, we wouldn't have, you know, that type of impact.
Is there any happy medium with lower dams, salmon ladders, something? Because it seems like you're hitting a dip wall trying to fight the dams.
Oh, is that question? The question is there a compromise? I don't know. I think we have to evaluate all the information we get in the end of the day and look at and see what the alternatives are. You know, ultimately it's an issue of the value of fish versus the value of power. It's almost that simple of an argument in the end of the day. And the California Energy Commission analyzed the power values of the project, and not to belittle the amount of power this produces, but they called it noise in the grid. It's a very small amount of power overall, even though there's a good chance we'll have blackouts this summer. But energy is a very complex thing, and it could be a whole day spent just talking about energy issues and really the value of that. But this is an incredibly valuable fishery, and it's a valuable fishery for the state of California, also for the state of Oregon. Just as it is for the tribes, and you know, it's that balance, and that's the whole point of FERC relicensing. The whole point of FERC relicensing is that they have fully acknowledged, the Federal Power Commission, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, acknowledged that you need to take a new look at projects every 30 to 50 years. You know, that's a generation, and they acknowledge that the values would change, and that's what we're doing here. We're reevaluating the value of the use of a river.
I think I'll make some concluding remarks because we need to kind of move on to the next part of this agenda. think there's three quick things I'd like to say with respect to what I've heard throughout this discussion, in a larger context even. First of all, there's this question of Western development, its notions of progress, and we're talking now here in other alternatives or other paradigms about sustainability and what that is. Secondly, I really think this needs to be spoken to in terms of elephants. I think we're talking about genocide in a lot of ways. Are the Native peoples national sacrifice peoples? That's the question we have to raise. And third is, in terms of the coalitions themselves, we've heard a lot of people working together to maybe forward a different type of understanding of the natural world and how people interact with that. People not only being two-leggeds, but salmon people and all these other kind of peoples. And finally, I'd like to really give everyone here, especially the panelists, a round of applause for coming and helping us.
Have you met an American Indian before?
No. Is this the Indians here?
I've read something about it and I'm completely on their side.
Have you met an American Indian before?
No, I haven't, no.
Have you ever met an American Indian before?
Never. Well, I did. I met one in New York once. I was quite surprised.
Have you met an American Indian before?
No, I haven't. Are they being affected by operations of the Pacifico?
Before the white men came,
they got rid of the buffalo so they could get rid of the Indians. Here we are 100 years later, now they're getting rid of the fish to get rid of Indians. It's being used as a weapon against us right now.
most of the salmon are gone, gone, gone.
Flow. Let it flow strong.
Thank you.
We're in Edinburgh, Scotland, and we are here because we want to bring our salmon home to the upper basin. Scottish Power owns the dams that are blocking our fish from being able to return to their native homeland.
The Klamath River is one of the three largest rivers in the West. The western portion of the river drains the rugged Klamath Mountains. The lower Klamath region begins with the confluence of the Trinity River. This place is called Wichipek. The Karuk Tribe lives in this downriver region. Upstream on the Trinity lies the Hupa Valley and the Hupa Indian Reservation. The Middle Klamath region is the ancestral homeland of the Karuk Indians. Together, these are the three largest tribes in California. The Klamath tribes live in the upper basin. The upper Klamath Basin grows high-quality alfalfa and other crops in a high desert environment. This alfalfa, grown in this desert climate, requires lots of water and intensive irrigation systems, including water diversions, reservoirs, and dams. These dams create a barrier to fish passage to the upper basin. Historically, salmon used to spawn high up the Klamath Basin, but now they are blocked by the first dam, Iron Gate. This is the end of the line for the salmon trying to migrate upriver. Industrial agriculture in the Upper Basin has much political and financial power. The Farm Bureau and local governments continue to pressure for more water diversions. Activities in the Upper Basin, such as water diversions, are felt downstream, in the Mid-Klamath region especially by Native Americans whose culture evolved with fish.
The acquisition, preparation, and consumption of food plays an important cultural and spiritual role for Karuk people.
My grandmother told me that we were responsible to get fish to our people, so in order for the fish to survive, we're supposed to, we eat fish, so it's kind of like we're obligated to get fish to our people, especially our elders.
Early anthropologists in this area described the Karuk, Hupa, and Yurok people as amongst the wealthiest people in California when they came to this region, and the reason for that was because of the incredible wealth of salmon in this area. For the last 150 years, the Karuk Tribe in California has gone from one of the richest, wealthiest people in the state of California to the poorest.
Poverty and hunger rates are amongst the highest in the state and nation. About 90% of tribal members in Siskiyou County live below the poverty line. Lack of traditional food leaves Karuk people with basic issues of food security. The devastation of the resource space, especially the fisheries, is also directly linked to the unemployment and low socioeconomic status of Karuk people today.
The economy down here in the lower river is such, is pretty much devastated. All the fishery communities and such are devastated by, the unhealthy riverine system.
It is estimated that before contact with white people, Karuk tribal members consumed approximately 1.2 pounds of salmon per day. Today, that amount is down to 5 pounds per person per year.
Back in the day, everything we ate was good. I mean, it was high quality. Deer meat. Especially salmon. And then you have all your eels and all your birds and things like that. All the medicinal plants that we used to eat. Instead of having healthy food to eat, fish. We're kind of relegated to eating commodities that the government gives out as, that's our subsidy. Commodities. High starch food, things that aren't so healthy. The materials that we're based, the Karuk people are, pretty much, I'll say, forced to eat.
Because of the shift in diet, tribal members experience higher rates of health problems, including diabetes at twice the rate of the national average, and heart disease at 3 times the rate of the national average.
In the spring of 2002, Gail Norton, the Secretary of the Interior, traveled to the Upper Basin to rally farmers around diverting water. Fearing the worst for their fisheries, the downriver tribes protest excessive water diversions. As the tribes predicted, the next summer saw the worst fish kill in U.S. history. Over 30,000 adult salmon were killed by lack of water. After examining the fish, scientists found that most of the fish died from overcrowding due to low water flows and excessive stress from high water temperatures. Carrying dead salmon from the fish kill, the tribes returned to the Upper Basin.
I have the honor to serve as the chairperson for the Yurok Tribe. My name is Susan Maston. And again, for those of you who weren't here this morning, I started off with Skuetnikoi. Good morning. This is not acceptable to us. We are fishing people. The fish are who we are. We depend on it for our very existence. It's our spiritual, our cultural well-being, and we will not tolerate another fish kill.
Today, these fish are the buffalo of our time. We've had to live with broken promises for generations.
My name is Leif Hillman. I'm a ceremonial leader for the Karuk Tribe. And I'm not here to talk as a politician. I'm here to speak for the fish. Through our ceremonies, we give thanks to the fish. The fish come back here to give themselves in honor to the people. This is what they came back to. This is disrespect. This isn't honor. This is disrespect.
What these fish represent here is a travesty of federal policy, a failed water policy not only to the Indian communities but to the entire Klamath River Basin. Who's going to come to the aid of the Indian people today? Who's going to come to the aid of the fish today? Where are the politicians that lined up last year to make political hay for the farming community? Where's the legislation that was drafted to bring millions and millions of dollars to the aid of the farmers last year? Where are they today? Why ain't they here standing up for the rights of the Indian communities, the fishing communities, and the folks that depend upon the rivers today?
These are my children, my nephew right here. We're fishing down at Ishipishi Falls, the only fishery that we have left on 70 miles of river taken from us. Over 100 village sites with fisheries associated with each village site. We have one fishery. We have over 3,000 people that we need to get food for subsistence purposes in one fishery. It's impossible.
I made sure that my children went out on Indian Day and went to the Klamath River and looked, because I told them this is the last time we ever want to see this again. And you'll be able to tell your grandchildren about this, the devastation that happened, but I said I only want you to be able to tell them that it happened one time, 1 year.
By the time they get up in the Siskiyou, where the Salmon River run,
this area doesn't have big business and corporations and jobs of that sort. We have our rivers, and people here rely on the rivers and love them so much. It's just become a function of jobs, and caring for the river have become one.
With headwaters high in the Trinity Alps wilderness and surrounded entirely by other wilderness areas, including the Marble Mountain and Russian wilderness, the Salmon River is one of the last undammed rivers in California. These pristine headwaters provide crystal clear and very cold water. Many see the Salmon River as a refugia and source pool for the entire Klamath River Basin. The area is famous for its whitewater, and boaters travel from across the country to experience the great playboating, wild, remote nature of the river canyon, and the challenging rapids. Underneath those rapids and calm pools, many species of fish call the Salmon River their home. The cold water and good spawning habitat are critical in maintaining the healthy fishery. Spring Chinook enter the rivers in the early summer and move to the top of the watershed. This population is separate from the larger run of fall Chinook.
Historically, the spring run is the abundant run around here. In the last 50 years or so, it's fallen off. It's tapered off quite a bit, and we don't see those fish as much.
These springers used to travel to the top of the Klamath River Basin, but their passage is now blocked by dams. Other species include the coho salmon, listed as threatened on the endangered species list.
We had quite a few juveniles, and we had a few year plus, because the coho stay in the river for a year before they out-migrate.
The secretive green sturgeon lives at the bottom of deep pools in the Klamath and the salmon.
Nobody knew there was so many sturgeon on the salmon, and last year I was getting, up to sometimes 30 sturgeon a day, sometimes 50, and that was remarkable. We had never seen that.
But we also get eels, usually ammosetes. It's a little baby eel. They tend to rear for what we're finding out 5 years in the sand before they emerge and develop eyes and eventually head out to the ocean.
The Klamath Mountain Province steelhead is recognized as a sensitive species. Like the coho, steelhead juveniles spend the entire summer in the freshwater system. This may expose them to more significant threats.
And I think one of the really important things about the salmon is that there's no hatchery here, and so this is all wild fish, and it's one of the last runs of wild fish left. On the Klamath, there's a lot of hatchery fish mixed in. You don't even know anymore what's wild and what's not. As far as we know, these are all wild fish, and so I think that's a really, it's hard to know the significance of that, but I feel that it's significant.
The fish evolved in the system of the cold water refugium situation, if not just past historically, definitely now, in the last, few years, since the dam's been put in, they've relegated to coming to these, critical times of the year where they need cold water refugia to survive.
Well, a lot of the questions I get is, well, how much will a few inches of water do for the fishery? And this particular place right here, a few inches would make the difference between having bullfrogs here like we see now or salmon. If we don't seize the opportunity to restore this 350 miles of habitat that's above Iron Gate Dam and the rest of the dams, then we're really missing out, because this is the biggest opportunity for restoration that we've seen yet.
For myself anyway, it's my way of being able to be involved with the land and the place where I live, and I really care about all the living creatures here, so I get to be a part of the whole life cycle here and help to keep this place healthy, keeping from doing harmful practices like spraying pesticides and herbicides, and help to show other people what this place is about and how it works, how the system works, and how to help keep it healthy, and that with community effort that we can do a lot.
Alligator fighting, take 1. Tribes go to Scotland, take 2.
I'm Craig Tucker. I'm the Outreach Director at Friends of the River, and Friends of the River is here to support the ongoing struggle of the tribes who are trying to fight to bring their salmon home. We're in Edinburgh, Scotland. We're in front of Scottish Power's shareholders meeting, and we brought a message to the shareholders, to their board of directors, and to the people of Scotland that their dams are in the way of the fish that belong to the Native American people, to the fishermen of California, and to all the people of California and Oregon.
Bring salmon home! Bring salmon home!
Well, I don't know what the protest is about here. That's what I was nosying in to try and find out,
Have you met an American Indian before?
No. Is this the Indians here? Oh well, you have a chance of getting it through then if there's negotiations going on. I think so.
We're not here to take away your money. We're here to save our fish. Work together. You guys are a green utility, and we depend on you guys. We depend on you to do the right thing, ma'am. Please do the right thing for us. Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am.
We accomplished what we came here to. We talked to the Scottish Power shareholders, the full Scottish Power board of directors. The stock holders in the company seem genuinely supportive of the message that we're bringing, and they want to see their company be responsible.
Excuse me, sir, are you a shareholder?
Yes.
Do you have a quick comment on the situation with the salmon and the Indians?
We have a tradition in Scotland in the same respect up at Pitlochry. We cured it at Pitlochry
Why doesn't Scottish Power do it over there?
It's good to find out about it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, cheers.
It's our goal to come over here and kind of raise the awareness of these issues as well as supporting the tribes. I mean, I guess the environmental issue is sort of rolled up into the tribal social justice issue. And so we are here first and foremost in support of that.
I've read something about it and I'm completely on their side. I think it's awful that, they're squeezed out of their normal way of living and stuff like that, I'm just absolutely against it. I think, it's their land and they should allow them to get on with their own way of living. I heard that the Indians would be here. Yeah, I heard that on the news, that they'd be having a little demonstration, so that's good, but I'm on their side. I don't know if there'll be a special resolution or not today, to discuss it, but hopefully someone will raise it from the floor and get some discussion on it.
Well, it sounds as though the answer might be some kind of salmon ladder, like in some places in Scotland where they've wanted to dam rivers, they've had to make a series of pools up around the side of the dam so that the salmon can still get up.
Have you met an American Indian before?
No, I haven't, no. The salmon, well, I have to tell you, I love it. Oh yes, I have read about that now, I have, yes. And it's destroyed all their salmon and it's not coming down. I am aware about the problems with fish stocks, and I'm aware about the problems of the native peoples. So I was saying anything that is going to improve their situation and also improve the ecology of the planet is a good thing.
You're a shareholder.
Yes, I'm a shareholder.
Heard about what's happening today with the American Indians and the salmon. We're from the U.S.
No, I haven't really. I've just found out about this now.
Great.
So I'll have to read more about it.
Great,
I'll
thank
give you
you.
a considered opinion later.
Thank you.
I have no comment to make at the moment because I have only just been presented with these leaflets and I haven't had time to read them.
Have you met an American Indian before?
No, I haven't. Are they being affected by operations of the Pacifico?
Well, I think it's really important that people are building up alliances, in order to stand up against big business, which is just riding roughshod over everything, over traditions, over ordinary people's needs and livelihoods and everything.
Well, we're just going to cook up probably like 5 to 10 salmon. These are Atlantic salmon. I've never had Atlantic salmon, but they're wild stock, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, what we came here for really is just to bring the salmon home. That's the goal, and that's hopefully what we do. We feel that the dams are destroying our culture, our fish, and our fish are the heart of our culture, and in that way, they're destroying our people. Maybe 8. I think it's when I first started using the knife and filleting. Yeah, 8 or 9. But I've been fishing, I think, my mom tells a story of me being out in the boat when she was still pregnant with me. I think I've been down and on the boat and ever since. So yeah. Fish ladders and dam removal, I think, is a part of the larger goal. We came over here really just to spread the word. We believe that our message hasn't been heard by the people in the States, so we came over here to hopefully appeal to the Scottish people and to Scottish Power as well.
The salmon have given their self to us for all these years, and we're just trying to give something back to them. We want Scottish Power to take the dams down, take Iron Gate Dam down, at least, at the very least, for starters.
And you've brought your son with you.
Yeah, I did, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this, is because I want him to be able to appreciate and respect the salmon the same way as I do, and as his father does, as my parents do, and all the people before us. We hope that they hear us and hear our cries and hear our pleas of all the people who have come here, all of these tribes that have come here to this place to show that we're going to support the salmon.
and I read about what was happening here, and I thought I have to come up and see this today. And you picked a beautiful spot as well. It's a lovely part of Edinburgh. I've always been interested in the Native American way of life, and I agree fully with what you're trying to do.
The Klamath people have gone so long, many generations without the salmon. I wanted to let them know that, you know, that's a big pain. We feel that. They're looking at people with broken hearts, but not broken spirits will stand together until the fish come home.
So we're here to ask Scottish Power to do the right thing and bring the salmon home.
You know, and it's for our survival, to where that salmon has a great meaning to us because of family. The water has a great meaning. It's family. The animals, the trees, all of the surrounding things around us is our family. And I'm here to tell the Scottish people that it is our world.
I'm a traditional fisherman, and I fish for the people, and my heart's very passionate about what I do. And now that's the reason why we're over here, to carry the message across the great pond, to come over here, to let them know our concerns. There's human rights violations here. You know, I think there's our constitutional rights are being violated. We have a right to religion. We have a right to our food. You know, we have a right to our way of life. We're not going away. We'll fight to the bitter end.
The tribal delegation went over to the Scottish Power headquarters to speak with Ian Russell, who is the CEO of Scottish Power, to educate them on how their dams that they currently own are impacting our resources. And we wanted to let them know that we are going to try everything we can to provide fish passage and bring the salmon home to the upper Klamath Basin.
Bring salmon home!
People, that's what it takes. It takes people to balance the right to the wrong. The words in this song before they drag you away or burn your house down. Yes, they will. They'll burn your house down.